Wow, thank you. All right. So yeah, I am born and raised in St. Louis, and to see an event of this magnitude with this subject matter it's inspiring and honestly a little humbling to be up here. So, kind of set the context here from Worldwide Technology. We're on the digital side of our business, and Worldwide is headquartered here in St. Louis. We historically grew up really on the infrastructure modernization side, and so we celebrate big top partnerships with OEM providers like Cisco and NetApp and NVIDIA. And as we've built out the digital side of our business over the last 10 years, from application development, data and analytics, we find ourselves in a really exciting time because I think, as we'll get into on the panel, a lot of our customers are really seeing this intersection of the digital world and the physical world faster than ever before. And as we as technologists sit in the middle of this bleeding edge of technology, it's fun because we're all consumers. And so whether we're shopping in a mall, shopping online, or in a grocery store, you think about that grocery store experience. 5 years ago, it was kind of a depressing environment to be in, where now you look at the types of opportunities that are in front of us. We pull out our mobile phone in the grocery store and we see wayfinding to the nearest item. We get auto-populated shopping lists based on our dietary needs. We redeem loyalty points at the point of sale. And so these worlds, the physical and digital worlds, are intersecting faster than ever before, and we as consumers now expect these types of experiences. And ultimately, it is the companies and brands that figure out how to bring those worlds together and unlock the data that flows between them that are going to win. And we're going to talk about a number of those things today. We have a really, in my opinion, an exciting panel today that is a good representative size of the things that are going on. And so, first of all, Tony needs no introduction. Another round of applause for Tony. So we'll talk a little bit about what Evolve 24 is doing in the market to help customers and consumers embrace some of the change that's going on. And then Dheeraj Patri, who Label Insights, another one of those companies that came out of the Arch Grants family, really experienced some evolution at the beginning of its when it was founded. 1 in 7 adults say they have a dietary need of some sort, and I'm just really fascinated with the work that Label Insights doing. So, round of applause for Dheeraj. Dheeraj, actually, do you want to maybe explain real quick some of the work that Label Insights doing, just because you obviously do it way better than I will?
Sure, I don't know if I'll do it better than you, but I'll try to tell people what we do. But in this day and age, with personalization and transparency being a big deal for consumers, in the traditionally not high-tech CPG space, it has been very difficult to rise to that demand that other industries are seeing. So Label Insights sits at the center of that, providing granular data around all the products that you eat or put on your body, and helps the industry, we're a B2B company, get that data so they can do great and wonderful things with our data and help the consumer. Our customers are mainly retailers and brands, but our marquee customer is the FDA. So we sit right in the middle of all of it, helping the industry push the data and transparency. It's very easy for us to push the concept of transparency because we don't make a call on whether something's good or bad. We push the data to all parties, and they do it for great things, and increasingly more and more AI, machine learning, and data science is being involved using our data.
That's great, Dheeraj. Thank you. And we'll dig into that a little bit more, obviously. I just think it's a fascinating time with the amount of food allergies and transparency that's needed around nutrition. Obviously, Label Insights sits in the middle of that. And then, raise the hands. Who's here eating at a Panera in the last month? A lot of people. And so, this guy right here, I've gotten to know Michael the last decade and respect him significantly, both professionally and personally. Panera is a brand that's obviously evolved its digital portfolio both inside and outside the store over the last decade and has won industry awards accordingly. And at the center of all that is technology. And Michael is the VP of Enterprise Technology Services at Panera and really in charge of that technology stack. So I just think we're going to get into some fascinating conversations with Michael. So round of applause for having him here as well. And of course, with a room full of all these minds, I'll ask Michael the first question on everyone's mind. Michael, how do you slice your bagels?
St. Louis style.
There you go. Good answer for this audience. Tony, you talked, I'll start with you, Tony. You talked a lot, and fantastic keynote. I really enjoyed it. You talked a lot about the fear and concern that's driving this particular aspect of the technology space. And then you ended really with the HI, the human part of it. What can companies and developers and technologists like us do to ensure that we're looking through the lens of us as humans?
Well, I think the key point there from human intelligence is the fear is that these systems and your algorithms will automatically execute the action. And so the concept of putting human intelligence into the decision before the action occurs is a critical safeguard to allowing your innovation and code to be implemented and applied in the right manner. And so the concept there of putting the human insight, the human intelligence, is at that end where the action really occurs. And many feel that these codes will remove the value and the need for subject matter experts, but that's where the subject matter expertise really comes into play, is the decision on should the action occur that the code suggests or that the code is recommending.
No, that's great. And Michael, Panera is obviously a brand that has excelled over the last couple years with some pretty mass consumer personalization. You open up your application, you get not only the favorite items that I've ordered, but also recommendations that you think I may like. So maybe talk a little bit about what personalization for the consumer means to a brand as big as Panera.
No, over the last couple of years, we focused our attention on target marketing to the individual. Rather than focusing on a swath of a particular demographic, we want to better understand frequency, your orders, your profile, and put that data together so that we can recommend cross-sell and upsell items to you as well. If you're buying yogurt, we don't want to send you with a reward for a cookie. So we want to take that data and personalize and customize those rewards as well as incentives for you to come into the Panera regardless of channel.
And I think we tend to think of data being only generated by us as the end consumer. There's a swath of data both outside and inside the cafe at Panera, from the data that's being collected from the network to oven sensors to point of sale. Maybe just talk about kind of the ecosystem and how you're bringing that all together.
Oh, absolutely. About 18 months ago, we built our data lake, and we built it on top of a Cloudera Hadoop ecosystem. And we created all the data pipelines and streamed them using Kafka, streaming in data from our cafes, order data, transaction data, Wi-Fi data as you're dwelling within our cafes. How long are you spending time there, or are you buying items while you're in the cafe itself, and bringing all that together and building the appropriate algorithms and running that through a decision engine so that we can upsell, cross-sell, we can do email campaigns. Ultimately, we'd like to have air traffic control where we can point you to the right channel. If there's too much going on in cafe, suggest you go through the drive-through or rapid pickup, or have it delivered to your office or home.
Yeah, and I think that part is so interesting because we do tend to think of it so much in the lens of we as consumers, and so the mass personalization is one aspect of it. The other side of it is the operational efficiency, and so if we can predict customer behavior based on buying habits or push notifications that we've sent, or even weather and traffic data, these things all affect traffic inside the stores. And so the operational efficiency is, I think, the other side of it. So Tony, maybe you want to talk about what ways we can use data for the good, not only on the mass personalization on the consumer side, but also internal to the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that's probably been the greatest focus, right? Most of the focus on these technologies have been on the operational side. And they could be just for economic benefit, the reduction of it, trying to understand the right products, the right kind of services that people are desiring, and that would resonate with their external audiences. And so our view on that is that the internal data provides one piece of the puzzle to understanding what products and services they would want and what experiences they're looking for. And then the other part that we work on is focusing on all that external data, actually more of the data that's being shared digitally in different environments. When you combine the two, some incredible insights and models can be derived. And so we've had great success with our clients where they are looking at their own data, looking for patterns, combining it with patterns of information and API streams from external data that's unstructured, and we structure it, and then we quantify it to build models that are very robust and eliminate blind spots from just looking at your internal data.
That's fantastic. Dheeraj, let's go to you. I want to talk briefly about the CPG vertical or industry, consumer packaged goods. It's an industry that is fairly disrupted right now. I think CPG companies, mass market companies like Pepsi, are trying to get closer to the consumer, where they've relied so heavily on shipping product to a retail location. So really, this is really an experiment for the CPG companies in data, and to figure out not only logistically how do you become more efficient, but how can we start to predict better customer patterns or behavior. So Dheeraj, maybe if you can enlighten us on kind of what you're seeing in the CPG industry and how data can help a lot of these companies like Pepsi.
Sure. The Label Insight was actually founded on my co-founder's father having to alter his diet because of a health issue. And so my co-founders went and just analyzed a bunch of data and said, hey, Dad, these are the cup noodles you can have because you don't have these kind of ingredients in there. The problem with that way of doing it, it's very labor intensive. And traditionally, the CPG industry has evolved by creating what they call these heavy hitter attributes, whether it's just heart healthy or gluten-free or non-GMO, those kind of things, where they think the mass amount of consumers want to select their food by. The truth is, as we all know, if you or someone in your family has a peanut allergy, or you have a child who has diabetes, it doesn't matter how healthy that product is to the mass market, it doesn't work for you. And so the only way that you can do that is to start personalizing it to the individual consumer. The problem with that is you can't have hundreds of thousands of people working for each of us trying to figure out what our diets are. And you really have to real-time model that data and understand at the shelf edge and during the path to purchase what is really moving the needle and increasing basket size, because consumers are now showing more loyalty to brands that help them do this than pure price. And we're seeing that a lot. I think we were a bit early with our data, but now we're seeing a lot of growth because retailers and brands really recognize that to be true. And luckily for us, we're witnessing growth because of that.
Matt, if I can add to that, we work with one of the high focus areas for us is CPG and in food. And I think as you look at, and we get to interact with those companies, one of the thrusts that really comes out is they are trying to do the right thing. They are trying to develop products that meet and resonate with the changing landscape of consumers' needs, be they health needs or specific kind of requirements that individuals have. And the power of using AI with that is many times they're really challenged to identify those trends, to identify those shifts, and to reveal them. And as a result of that, because it takes them longer to develop a product, they need to identify them very early. And AI, in our case, is providing that lens to foresee where is demand and need occurring. And the second thing that we've seen in that data, and this is one around the personalization, what we've seen in the personalization is that what they're looking for from a consumer perspective is they don't wish to get mass-produced food. They don't, so it doesn't have to be down to, this matches exactly me in a one-to-one perspective. What they want is companies to be more thoughtful of the production and not mass-produce these products. And so I say that because Dheeraj brought up an excellent point, which is the challenge companies find is, well, how am I going to do, I can't manufacture a unique product for every different consumer because they have unique needs. And that's not what they're asking. What they're asking is more thoughtful production and a move away from mass production of foods that really serves no one because it's so generic.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
If I can add to that, we need to deal with it on a real-time basis. So 80% of our orders are customized. Therefore, if we can provide more information to the associate that's taking the order or making the order, and that order history suggests allergens, then the associate could assure that peanuts are not included, or some other item that is going to cause the customer sickness or illness.
That's fantastic. And, marketing plays a kind of a tricky role in this as well, where us as consumers, we think of shopping in the grocery store. We become fairly reliant or loyal to certain products and the look and feel of these products. Well, what happens when that product is rebranded? Well, now a product that I just trusted looks different, so I may not find it as easy or may not be as accessible. And so image recognition is one particular technology that we may use that can run a little faster and smarter than we can in our own eyes. So, Dheeraj, maybe talk a little bit about, at Label Insight, what are the types of technology that you're using to generate these types of recommendations and data engines?
So let me preface this with, I am not a data scientist. We do have
Nor am I.
Yeah, so forgive me if I don't use exactly the right terminology, but we leverage a lot of the, from an image recognition perspective, things on AWS and on Google. They have models that you can feed the data in where we have people look at, hey, this is really something else. And we're getting to well over 90% accuracy. What that gives us is an ability to recognize and attributize a product at much more scale than we could, and definitely quicker than our competitors can. And so that allows us to really push the needle further. But the one thing that I do want to talk about where I think companies could go very quickly right now is, we work with a company, Nielsen. We have a partnership with them where we give them thousands of attributes. Now, Nielsen has always known what sold, but they didn't know why it sold. And so using our data creates a combination of factors that makes it very interesting. For example, there was a customer in a particular category who said, why aren't these really healthy products selling? Isn't that what everyone's looking for? And the truth is that is. But what they understood with our data is healthy perceived ingredients were growing versus just pure healthy products. The bad products were going down. And with that understanding, you can understand why things are happening. But what I really think, and this is where the really smart people, like people in this room, could help the industry, especially the CPG industry, is this is all prescriptive. We have subject matter experts looking for something, looking for clusters, and then analyzing the data, proving it, and then training a model for it. That's a very supervised learning model. I think with unsupervised learning, there'd be great insight that can be uncovered, not just with the subject matter expert, but with the AI itself. I'm not saying that we make decisions immediately on it, but that could really uncover insights that aren't known and let the data speak for itself. And we are a data and technology company, and that's what we believe in. And I think that's where the world is going. And people who understand that will get further than others.
I was going to add on the image part. We initiated a new project, and I'm really excited because historically we've looked at image analysis repeatedly. Typically it's for object identification. Is it a car? Is it a bus? Things of that nature. But we did a project recently at Ford, and I think it's quite innovative of them to think this way and applied it, where we were looking at features design, like the angle of and the curves on the car. And so we're now, yes, we can figure out it's a Mustang or it's a F-150, but what we're starting to do is identify what makes it attractive. What makes it viewed to be a very beautiful vehicle, an elegant vehicle, what degree of curvature, et cetera. And so, I talked about the emotion of the language. Now we're starting to get into the emotion of the visual. How does the visual trigger certain psychological aspects of it? And it's quite an exciting field. It's still very embryonic, but exciting to look at it with AI that way.
It is, because it gets beyond the ones and zeros that we're traditionally thinking of in a very analytical world, where there are these lines of subjectivity that exactly to your example. Tony, while we've got you, we've got you talked a lot about the fear and concern, the privacy and ethics, and kind of the legalities of that are underneath that umbrella as well. Can you maybe speak for a minute on, both legally and not legally, what is the responsibility of us both, around ethics and privacy of collecting this type of data?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's That topic is a conference unto itself, right? And so I think the first thing is that the freedom to operate is already being constrained, right? With GDPR and new regulations passed in California, it is a signal, it is an indicator that more governance, more oversight, and licenses to operate are decreasing in this area. And that's why my call for really strong stewardship and transparency, or else these technologies will become very limited into niche applications. And while that seems like an outcome that's just not possible, we've seen it relentlessly with new novel technologies. I think the aspect of those regulations coming into play should cause every company to look at how are they collecting it, how are they storing it, how are they utilizing it, and then on top of that, what code of ethics do they have? See, a lot of these challenges is when all the regulations aren't in place, there's no clear what's right, wrong. So a company has to decide what they stand for. What are their values around data collection and data usage? I mean, that's the heart of what's driving that element. And so I would say every company, as these regulations continue to come to bear, and of course you're going to comply, to give thought and reflect on the values as a company, as an individual, what safeguards, how will you operate, and how will you implement those throughout the organization. And of course, naturally, it should reflect and resonate with what consumers externally are demanding, as opposed to what a company thinks they should do.
So let's talk about some of those end consumers again, Michael. Certainly the fear and concern is there, as Tony articulated this morning, but the perception around giving up data, it has to be that win-win across both sides. I'll give up my data for value exchanged by the company I'm giving it to. Can you maybe speak for a minute on what Panera has done to speak authentically to consumers, or different ways that it's using the data? Maybe just through applications or inside, outside the cafe?
No, I think, GDPR, the California Consumer Privacy Act, is driving a lot of regulation internally in data privacy, and really having us take a harder look at where our data is from a data sovereignty perspective, how it's encrypted in the cloud, on-prem, as well as on the wire itself. And more involvement we're seeing from legal, compliance, IT working together to protect the customer's data, as well as looking at how we're going to comply with those regulatory needs to determine how the consumer tunes what we have access to and what we don't have access, and when they want something obfuscated or deleted in particular. So I think moving forward, the customer is clearly going to be in control as to how the data is consumed within the organization.
That's great. Dheeraj, same question to you.
I have a response which is going to result in a question to both of you, our retailer customers use our attributes across behavior data, sometimes in real time, to understand what consumer preference is. The truth is, if you watch someone's diet or a basket, there are certain health conditions that you can deduce and cluster because of that. And so there have been pharmacies interested in this data. However, it creates HIPAA violations as far as we are, and we're a small startup. We can't deal with all those controls, so we have to create a black box kind of environment for them to do that. That being said, our mission is not to cause bad or do anything bad, but this is where it becomes really complicated, because it's not just about, if a consumer just thought they're sharing what they buy, so much can be deduced from that. And so we've had a lot of legal issues getting past the hurdle, mainly because of that, when I think we could have had a few deals in the place because of that. So I'm very interested in what you think, how those things get navigated moving forward.
Well, in the past, we've been primarily focused on nutritional type information, caloric type information. Ideally, we advocate clean, healthy food. Ideally, in the future, we would love to be able to partner with hospitals, the medical field, pharmaceuticals, and things like that in terms of recommendations on diet based on if you're vegan or you have diabetes or things along that line. However, I think we're just at the very beginning of the journey and how we deal with this data and how it's shared and how we assure that it's trusted across entities. PII data is one that comes to mind, and how do we ensure to the consumer, how we're protecting that data and ensuring that it's in the right hands through role-based access control, as well as what a third party has access to.
These questions are more complex than a company itself can to solve them. And so my view on that is that it's going to take a great amount of understanding and stakeholder dialogue with all those different entities, because unto its own, a small company or even a big company, but a singular company will not be able to understand all the implications of implementing those kind of connections to different data. So what's the answer? If you don't know, well, first, as a researcher, I seek to understand that crowd and their concerns from the digital landscape of conversation, because they're going to uncover things organically that they're concerned about that companies wouldn't. And secondly, the process of stakeholder outreach and dialogue to understand what are some implications that would be.
We're good. I'll take it from there.
I think I hit the mute button by accident.
But if I can add to that, I think what's interesting within the organization itself is it's fostering the need to have data privacy offices within your organization that is setting policy. It's not just information security or legal, but it's really about the issuance of data privacy for the consumer, for the associate, for our third parties.
And we'll maybe do one or two questions. If there's any questions out there from the audience, we'll get to those in a second if we've got roaming microphones. Great. So one of the things that, when Panera was on its digital journey a couple years ago and they complemented their traditional point of sale with the self-service kiosk, the question that always comes up inevitably in all of these, fears and concerns is, are the robots or the technology going to take our jobs? In this particular case, Panera quickly realized that we could repurpose someone that was, behind a traditional point of sale and purpose them more into quality control and other aspects of the business. Tony, I guess question back to you again. As we look at 100% automation, and will a human be necessary in the automation loop? And what safeguards or guardrails will still need to be in place looking forward in the world of AI?
Yeah, I go down, I find those very interesting, those little kiosks and working for them. I think the perspective is what emotional element is it trying to solve, right? If it's trying to foster efficiency, that might not be the need that the consumer is really looking for. For example, if emotionally they go and they like connection, they like to speak to people, then obviously giving them control over the process with a kiosk is actually counter to their deep emotional and psychological needs. So that context of looking at it from the consumer's lens as opposed to company lens, because I can see the efficiencies, I can see the different elements of why it'd be valuable to a company to do that, but the value to the consumer might be quite different. There's other expressions of control and transparency relative to the interaction with them that could be created and innovative, and as a result, that's where the human has to come in to take that information to innovate. The computers can give suggestions, can give kind of ranking, maybe probability of best action, but the human needs to be involved in that decision.
Absolutely. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, my question is for Michael. You had mentioned PII data, and one of the challenges that we have right now is building a model where PII data could be feeding the model. It's not coming on the outside of the model. It's not being exposed on the back end of the predictions. However, we have a challenge that in our environment, we're trying to protect workers, and you had mentioned protecting consumers and making sure that there's health allergies taken into account as well. Have you had any challenges with data coming into a model, not being exposed on the back end of it, but it's for the betterment of the consumer, but you can't use it because it's a protected feature going into the model? Could you speak to that?
Oh, I think there has been cases where we've, had data that we could provide better information to the consumer or to the associate. However, given that we're in a new territory with government regulation and consumer control of the data itself, it's still quite the challenge. I wouldn't say that we've got this, figured out yet at this particular point in time. I think we're still very much at the beginning of our journey and in collecting this data. I think we also want to assure that whatever goes into the data lake is protected and encrypted, and understand how it's used and who has access to that data. But I don't believe we've got it all figured out yet. I think everyone's still at that beginning point, and it's really how much you share, in terms of terms and conditions that the consumer, provides you or agrees to in terms of how the data is utilized. But I think CCPA and GDPR is going to change all that. I think, there's going to be fine-tuned granularity and access controls as to what the consumer is going to allow the organization to use, both domestically and internationally.
Maybe one or two more from the audience. You just raise your hand. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, a phenomenal start to the conference. This is really fascinating stuff so far, and I'm sure it's going to be a great day. Quick question, Michael, but of course the entire panel and stuff, the regulatory and the privacy issues, do you feel that it's going to create a stop in our progress and allow a company like China, who has a mandate to take over AI, a window of opportunity to leapfrog ahead of us and control the AI market?
Anyone?
That's a very good question. And I think that's something that, we need to protect ourselves as we move more internationally and expose data across multiple countries. I think we need to put more emphasis on AI and how we're using that particular data. But I think it's also going to come into investing more in our cybersecurity and assuring that through intrusion detection, wide area firewalls, things like that, we're anticipating what bad actors are doing across the internet.
Yeah, I foresee significant constraints being put in place. One might think of these past years as the wild, wild west with AI, and Cambridge Analytica caused a fundamental shift and change that came, even that work was out of work done originally at Berkeley in regards to identifying patterns and information. So there will be a step back to the point about the data. We've already implemented processes and procedures that anonymize all information that we have, block any kind of PII information from coming in. We're preparing for a far greater constraint in regards to how we operate with this information. And frankly, our end customers, we don't want to compromise any of our end customers with data that was derived from PII information. And so the point Mike was saying about, even from a vendor perspective, where you're getting your data, not unconsciously creating risk to your organization through data that is flowing into systems or being stored. Sometimes you see people literally as simplistic as sharing Excel files with PII information and flowing. So we got these large governance and cybersecurity systems in our IT groups, and then people are sharing Excel spreadsheets with people's names and all this other information. And so there will be significant restrictions on it.
One more.
So I think, Dheeraj, you brought up a really interesting point about using your data to market then pharmaceuticals and how you don't want to do that. But I guess from the consumer side, what if I'm a consumer and I have one of these conditions, I'm unhappy with my current pharmaceuticals? Why couldn't they opt in then to be advertised?
To set the record straight, I'm happy for you to do that. The issue is with...
I guess it's with unsolicited, like unwanted marketing.
I guess the issue is we've faced legal hurdles because of that. And the controls that have to be put on a company our size would be devastating for us. So we had to create a mechanism where we analyze the products as much as we want. We can tell you this cluster of products would be indicative of a type 2 diabetes kind of condition. And then I'll give you the bad one. And then and I lost my train of thought. But basically they're the ones who have to analyze the data that way. The problem with that is no one knows our data better than us. And I would love that PII data, and I would love to do the right thing. But it has been a tremendous hurdle for our growth. But the best way to look at it is I wouldn't want me or my family to be compromised by this, so I wouldn't want to compromise someone else's.
There is pretty good representative size of people here from companies of all sizes. And I guess I'd ask the whole group here, not all of these companies have huge farms of data scientists or security and governance groups. So any recommendations, both from the brand side, the startup side, what can companies do just to get started and move in the right direction, to be forward facing, to embrace some of these trends that we've talked about today?
Sure, I'll go. From a startup perspective, the key is data, and you have to capture, you got to create a data warehouse or a data lake where you have to capture the unstructured data, and don't lose that data because it will be used later on for a whole bunch of stuff. Data is the currency of the 21st century, and you're throwing it away all the time right now. I'm not talking about PII, I'm just talking about your own data. And finding a mechanism to use it and look at it, whether it's just for business intelligence, it can develop into modeling for future gains for you and your customers.
That's great. Tony?
Seeing Dheeraj has answered more like the technical aspect of it, I'll say set a framework up front as to what you will and you won't do. This way, that framework scales as you scale. In 2003, we were a startup, and the ability to institutionalize those processes up front as you start to grow very quickly and add staff and add research, I would say that would be one of the critical pieces, and those frameworks should be driven from a values-centric framework around how you will use data, where you will use it, and where you won't use it, so that you can implement and institutionalize that as the organization grow, because many of you will grow significantly. David showed the massive amount of investment and financials that are flowing into the AI space, and so that will fuel a lot of growth in these sectors.
And if I could add, I would recommend get started now. It's going to be table stakes in the next year or two. We started with a very small use case. We took a couple engineers and we decided that we were going to build models around capacity planning and breakpoint analysis for our omni-channel. And that's where we began our journey. And then we were ready when the business was ready to do one-to-one or target marketing to the individual. We're also seeing AI in a lot of our infrastructure technologies, whether it's application performance management or it's security, where it's correlating all these events so that you really understand what's going on within your networks, within your applications. And it really benefits the customers indirectly because you're making certain that these applications, these systems are healthy and running well. And in the event that they do run into an incident, you can determine root cause analysis and reduce that mean time to recovery. So we see that benefit as well.
And I just, again, we'll give you props on this, is I think what Panera has done well is, when you walk into a Panera, make no mistake, there's a lot of technology behind the scenes there. But, Michael's someone that sits really on the technology side, but is always able to articulate the business or the use case behind that. And I think when you walk into a Panera, it feels very authentic. And because of that reason is make sure that we empathize with what we're trying to solve. And then technology can always be the force multiplier behind it to back it up. So maybe just on that note, where do you see kind of the next 3 to 5 years? What use cases are driving a lot of these technologies, and what would you future forecast? Come on, Dheeraj, kick us off here.
I hate these questions because I'm always wrong. maybe 5 to 10 years. Let's go there.
There you
where you control your own data, whether it's health-related or preference data. You walk down the aisle, you go on Amazon, you go on any e-commerce website, and it understands what you really want and recommends it for you. So you choose the right things that you want to use. We all crave that. I think humankind's craved that forever, to make this world yours. And I think that's where we're heading, and that's where personalization, and that's where I think AI has a big role to play.
Tony?
I think from a sub-trend, there'll continue to be significant progress in the application of what I call human engineering, taking expert models, expert minds, and codifying those into systems. I think that'll continue, especially with some of the step back with the PII data. So this area is you take the absolute best and figure out how are they making such great decisions, and you mimic it with your computer code. The second one that I think in the next few years is continued application in robotics. The ability to, and partly because of the aspect you had said and the team said about decreasing operational costs, increasing quality, increasing consistency in products. I think those two are the leading one, and I think there's going to be a lot of headwinds around the use of it for personalization, for market recommendations. I think there will be a step back there, and based on areas of governance and ethics that get implemented, then it has the potential to come back to be significant in its promise in those areas in marketing.
That's great. Michael?
I think where we're looking at it is you kind of look at the connected community, the city, the cafe. It's going to warrant real-time analytics, which is going to force edge computing. So when you think about it, our cafes, any channel that you access with, needs to be real-time. Data is going to be streaming in, data is going to be streaming out. In many cases, that has to be processed at the edge. It's going to be way too expensive and slow to bring it all the way back to the data center. So I think with regards to IoT, the smart cafes, ordering in your car, things like that, the network connectivity and the real-time analytics and the computing at that edge is going to be key.
Yeah, and before the show, we were talking a little bit about digital signage in Panera, and it's something that a lot of brands are taking a look at, simply because these static menus change at least 3 times a day. And so simply digitizing them is a real opportunity, but it's much more beyond that. It's not, let's slap a digital JPEG up there that has the menu. There's a real opportunity there to customize based on, if 80% of the people inside a cafe prefer lemonade over tea, we can change images dynamically. Or based on the weather, we can recommend coffee or soup instead of tea. And so there's a lot of opportunity just in that space alone. The operational side as well, as again, the consumer side, I think we all understand kind of the recommendation engines that come out of that, but as we look at really the gig economy and hourly employees, whether they're in a pharmacy or a cafe, the ability for our companies to predict customer behavior for the next day or week and alter our employee staff schedules accordingly, there's a real opportunity both on the consumer side as well as the internal enterprise side, operationally speaking. Any other final questions out there from the audience? Final chance?
So one of the most important things that you guys mentioned was actually having a human in the loop when you're doing these kinds of computations and making these decisions. But some of these decisions come down to absolute minutia, or they're just huge. And one human or even a team of humans doesn't have all the resources available in order to understand how this decision affects the rest of the world. If you're Google, and you have this AI that's telling you to do this search or optimization or something like that, it's hard to really understand what's going on. So my question is, what kind of interpretability do your models have, and how are you striving to make those models more interpretable?
That's the underlying reason I said that the most difficult resource is not data science.
Is that the one I started with? It just worked its way all the way down?
That the most limiting resource is not data science, but decision scientists. The most significant challenge we see when we provide incredible amounts of data on trends and consumers and technologies is the inability for companies to translate it into different decisions. To the point where we've partnered with firms that just do that. BCG is a strategic partner of ours for that very singular reason. How do you translate all this data into a business plan, a decision-making plan? So you are absolutely correct. It is the most difficult part. It's not been solved, and it's why it's such a scarce resource to get those decision scientists that can translate it into relevant actions.
Anything else? One more?
Okay, I've got one more question for the panel. So is there a way, maybe we can brainstorm here, maybe not, is there a way to tell the consumer in the spectrum of, hey, this is a product that was for everybody, oh, now it's a little bit more, okay, there's some decision trees and like traditional logic here, oh, but now we've entered into the realm of AI, and what you're getting, the message that you're getting, the marketing image that you're getting is now an AI-produced thing. Is there like a label that we can create? Is that a concept that you've seen out there? Is that something that would be helpful for consumers to be like, oh, I will think about this differently. I'm in the context. I know that this was an automated recommendation.
I think it's an incredible thought around transparency, right? And providing the manifestation could be a label, but the idea there that I think is very solid is the transparency in regards to where it's being used and how it's being used in your processes. And when the team asked if I would speak at this conference at the keynote, I had a vision as to why I wanted to do it. So AI is throughout all of the country, right? It's being heavily developed and researched and implemented on the West Coast as well as the East Coast. David said, usually it's in Boston and Silicon Valley. And what I think is the difference for St. Louis is to be the epicenter of responsible stewardship and implementation of AI. And ideas like that, I believe, will foster our growth in AI, being known to have Midwestern values and be the show me state, as David said, because that's going to be the new expectation. Ideas that you brought up, David, of how are you being transparent about how it's being used, where it's being used, so we know you're being responsible in that application. So that would be my vision for us, to build on what you just said as a follow-on.
If I could add to that in terms of the transparency, to relate it to business, I mean, Panera has focused on clean, healthy food. So we were very transparent in all the chemicals and gunk and things like that, and went totally clean within our food and communicated that to the customer. So I think in terms, if we take AI and be transparent about how we're using the information, what we're suggesting, it would be more adopted by the consumer.
And this somewhat of a simple example. It says we all download apps from the App Store. You download an app, it asks, first thing it does, asks for your enable location services. And without any context, we see about only 10% of users actually comply or say okay. Whereas if we tell them and onboard them in a responsible way and tell them, here's how we're going to use that location data, here's the value back to you, we see upwards of 70, 80% of people that actually adopt that type of capability. So again, I think somewhat of an anecdotal example, but one that if we're upfront and we tell the user what's in it for them, we can be responsible and also bi-directional with the value. Well, that does it for time. Again, to be born and raised St. Louis and see an event like this, and to have the technical depth and the tracks that you're all going to be a part of is inspiring and humbling. And again, round of applause for our panel today.